this evening we are going to talk about the racist murder of George Floyd and the following uprising in the US. Our guest this evening is Elizabeth. She is from the Independent Socialist Group, and for her it's in the morning, so let's shout out a big good morning to Elizabeth. Yes, she is going to tell us about the situation, and that this is just not a system error, but it's a bigger movement that's now occurring, and we are going to be able to discuss strategy and a socialist perspective for the Black Lives Matter movement. So I'm going to ask you, Elizabeth, to unmute and going to be silent for the rest of the discussion.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for inviting me to speak today about what's been going on in the United States. I'd like to start off by talking about the trigger for these events. On May 25th, the police officer Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd by kneeling on his neck for 8 minutes. The police were investigating a reportedly counterfeit $20 bill used by Floyd, though they immediately drew their guns and proceeded to murder him through asphyxiation. Chauvin, the officer who kneeled on his neck, had dozens of complaints about brutality and had even murdered another innocent civilian, Leroy Martinez, a Native American man, in 2011. Once videos broke of this ghastly yet typical police brutality, protests started in Minneapolis and quickly spread around the country and the world. This immense anger going on isn't only directed at the institution of American police, but it's also directed at the capitalist system at large. There are a lot of underlying factors that are leading into the anger that is feeding these protests, and this accumulation of anger against the police and against capitalism stems from a dark future. The future is looking very precarious for youth, and it was looking this way even before the coronavirus crisis. The economic boom after the 2007-2008 crisis didn't reach working people. All the new wealth generated was kept at the top of society in the hands of millionaires and billionaires. Working people never fully recovered from the Great Recession about 10 years ago and are now being plunged into a new one. To start, American policing hasn't been dramatically changed despite the Black Lives Matter movement that started in 2013. This movement has been co-opted by the Democratic Party and other liberal NGO-type forces, which has made it weak and ineffective. It still acts as a large banner that many are using in these protests, and it is raising this issue, but the movement itself seems to currently be a dead end into the Democratic Party or is inactive. In Minneapolis, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement Facebook page hadn't posted since 2017. We have to see what will become of the Black Lives Matter movement, but it's clear that the American working class is being radicalized by the current situation. First, Americans were becoming more class conscious because of the contradictions of capitalism. These contradictions are becoming much more apparent due to the coronavirus economic and health crisis going on in the United States. Now we are seeing the further class divisions growing between ourselves and the layer of white, reactionary, petite bourgeois, and ruling class elements who are on the other side of these protests, siding with the police. The most immediate heightening of tensions beyond the recent murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery is the deepening economic crisis in the US in which unemployment has surpassed the peak of the Great Depression due to COVID-19 and the continued existence of our rotten private healthcare system. Because our health insurance is provided by our employers, when we lose our jobs, we lose our health insurance. While workers have only received $1,200 in a one-time cash payment from the government, and the government has limited the expansion of unemployment benefits, but not everyone has been able to access them. At the same time, corporations are receiving massive bailouts to the tune of trillions of dollars. Additionally, just 43,000 billionaires individually received $1.7 million each as a bailout. The unemployment rate is around 20%, the highest ever, and it could reach up to 30% in the near future. Even though millions of Americans have applied for these unemployment benefits through the government, only about 30% of those who applied have received any money. This situation is only amplified due to the coronavirus. The US has the highest number of cases and deaths in the world. Just today, there have been over 1.8 million cases of COVID-19 in the US. People have seen how deadly COVID-19 is and how it is disproportionately affecting Black people due to centuries of systemic racism evident in our economic and healthcare systems. People are angry and are desperate for change. These underlying factors are shaping the character of these protests. This anger that has built up is being released in these protests. Reports have shown that looting is being done by white supremacist groups and cops to make protesters look bad, but at the same time, looting is still being done by protesters as well. In fact, much of the looting in Minneapolis that the capitalist press condemns has been for largely basic supplies like groceries, diapers, toilet paper, etc. In other words, the austerity and stagnant wages of capitalism have created a system in which people cannot afford basic necessities. The capitalist system has put profit before people, and people are angry, and they should be. Many liberals, conservatives, and reactionaries are decrying the riots and the looting taking place across the country. And though we're not accelerationists and we do not support individual acts of violence, the rioting and the looting is understandable given the precarious economic situation that the American working class faces and the violence that has been started by the police. On the first night of protests in Minneapolis, Target was looted. This Target is actually the US headquarters for Target. Some small businesses have been affected as well, and we see a clear division opening up in this layer of the petite bourgeois small business owners. People in my area are boycotting a local pizza shop whose owner said that she would run over protesters with her car before she let them burn her shop. In contrast, an Indian restaurant in Minneapolis that got burned down released a statement in support of the movement, saying that they could always rebuild later or move to a different place. It is possible that there will be a split in the petite bourgeois based on their support of the movement. This is the key point that the media and the ruling class are pushing, that property destruction is more of a problem than the systematic murdering of Black people in the US. And as I said, the police are playing a role in trying to manipulate the media to discredit the protesters. Protesters have shared videos of the police destroying their own cars and machinery and then blaming it on protesters. Many people on social media are sharing pictures and videos of cops kneeling in solidarity with the protesters or marching with them, but reports also show that immediately after these pictures and videos were taken, the cops turned on the protesters and began assaulting them with tear gas and rubber bullets. These police departments are taking part in this public relations campaign to try and boost their image, to try and make them seem more friendly to people. But in reality, they're just using these photos to undermine the anger that is being directed at them. the police have also continued to commit acts of brutality against unarmed, peaceful protesters. For example, a few days ago in Boston, the police announced on Twitter at 9 p.m. that the protesters should go home because the police said the protest was over. Many states have instituted a curfew, and in Massachusetts, the curfew was 9 p.m. 3 minutes later, at 9:03 p.m., the police surrounded a group of about 200 protesters at Boston Common and began attacking them with tear gas and rubber bullets. The police had closed the subway, so protesters couldn't escape. And this is just one example among thousands of how the police are reacting to these protests. It's very standard that the police all across the country are instigating violence against the peaceful protesters. It is possible that some police could genuinely defect and join the protests, but at this point, it's unlikely and so far hasn't happened. Trump is cracking down with more authoritarian methods. Even before the murder of George Floyd, the Department of Justice was quietly seeking the right to indefinitely detain people without trial during emergencies, and an emergency could constitute, the COVID-19 crisis. Trump has tweeted declaring Antifa or anti-fascist activists and other left-wing activism as terrorism. On Twitter, he also said that when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Yet a few weeks ago, when armed right-wing protesters were marching with their guns demanding an end to the lockdown, Trump commended them and said that they were exercising their right to free speech. The police stood there and did nothing. In Michigan, when armed protesters went into the Capitol building with their guns, yet now the police are shooting and terrorizing peaceful protesters involved in the current struggle. Trump has also ordered the National Guard, a branch of the military, to go and crush the protests. The National Guard has been used in the past to crush large protests and strikes. Before Trump's call to use the National Guard, the state of Minnesota, home to the original Minneapolis protests, sent the National Guard out on the second day of protests, and this state is dominated by the Democratic Party. The city of Minneapolis, all of their politicians, almost all of them, are Democrats, and the state legislature in Minnesota is dominated by the Democratic Party. This just shows how the two capitalist parties work together to further capitalism and crush resistance. The reaction of Democratic governors and other politicians in the Democratic Party mirrors Obama's response to the Ferguson Uprising. The Ferguson Uprising in 2013 is what sparked the creation of the Black Lives Matter movement. Democrats in local and state leadership have been making nice statements. They have been voicing their support, but in action, they have been undermining the movement. They have had control over these police departments and the city councils for decades, but they have done nothing to affect change. New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, Minneapolis, Oakland, Baltimore, all of these police departments have terrible records of brutality and violence, but these cities are dominated by the Democratic Party. These non-committal and non-concrete proposals that are being put forward currently by the Democratic Party are just platitudes about justice and morals, but will do nothing to affect long-lasting systemic change. These protests, though they have brought people together from all races and have combined elements of the working and middle classes, they are being dominated by liberal identity politics. A new, highly limiting slogan of the movement has emerged. This slogan is "Amplify Black Voices." And while this is, of course, important, and we should be listening to Black workers and youth and what demands and ideas they are putting forward, what is implicit in this statement is that those who aren't Black should be silent supporters rather than active participants in the debates of ideas for how to solve police brutality. And this perspective is incredibly wrong. Identity politics are dividing the working class. Identity politics limit the approach to organizing to solely an identity basis and push out the ideas of class struggle and limit the potential of real solidarity. This is a fundamental mistake and will hold back the movement if identity politics continues to rule over the consciousness of the protests. Instead, we have to develop a democratic movement of the working class as a whole, not just a certain part based on racial or gender identity. By only listening to people of a certain race, no matter their class, members of the Black elite like Obama, for example, could become the leaders of these movements. These Black elite have been handpicked over decades and are very loyal to the ruling class. These people have done nothing to solve the issues of police brutality, despite having a greater ability to control and contain the political perspectives being put forward. The protests in Ferguson that erupted in 2013 happened when Obama was president. And despite his identity as a Black person, he did nothing to fundamentally challenge police brutality because of his partnership and taking part in being a member of the ruling class. One of the largest pushers of identity politics are the Democrats and NGO-type forces, and this is just another reason why our movement must break with the Democratic Party completely and its supporters. At our interventions, we have met many workers who agree with our calls to break with the Democratic Party, and many more who are open to considering it. Of course, we have to be tactful in our when we go to these protests. We don't want to alienate people who still have illusions in the Democratic Party, but it's important for us to plant seeds of doubt in the capability of the Democratic Party to affect change. Our role is to act as the memory of the working class, as Lenin described. Even though we're not, a big party, like was the case with Lenin's quote, it is still crucial that we raise our Marxist understanding of capitalism and the two-party system as we intervene in these protests to help lead the movement in a better direction. For the foreseeable future, these protests will continue. There is enough anger to sustain them for some time, yet, like Trotsky said, without a party or an organization, the anger of the working class will dissipate like steam without a piston box. The movement must put forward its own solution and its own program. A program that we are pushing right now has the following demands. We want to demilitarize the police. We want to stop wasting public funds on military technology and weaponry for police departments. We want to end the use of tear gas and pepper spray and rubber bullets and end attacking and provoking protesters. Instead, we need to invest in affordable housing, universal health care, public transit, public schools, green jobs, and other social programs and services that can uplift the often left behind Black workers, as well as the whole workers' movement, and to build workers' confidence. Community control of the police through democratically elected committees of workers and community members with hiring and firing power is crucial. These boards would need the ability to review and create policy. They would also need the authority to conduct independent investigations into cases of police misconduct. Currently, the system is more punitive, where police do something bad and then are punished. But we need a more proactive council where we can truly subject the police to the control of the workers from the local communities who have the best understanding of what needs to be done to defend their communities and end the violence and abusive practices on the part of the police. These protests have some serious implications for the upcoming election in November. These protests have spread in Washington, D.C., and forced Trump into the bunker that hasn't been used since the attacks of 9/11. This is a huge twist in events for Trump's re-election prospects. Before COVID-19 hit, Trump was riding high on the success of the stock market. The ruling class was very happy with the increased austerity that Trump was putting through with his fellow ruling class politicians. But despite the attempted impeachment on the part of the Democrats, which was more of a political show, Trump still has the backing of the U.S. capital class thanks to the major tax cuts and other friendly policies that he put forward. This shutdown after the coronavirus has forced Trump to decide whether the economic damage or the potential COVID death toll hurts his reelection prospects more. He's decided that the economic damage would hurt it more, obviously, because he has been pushing to begin reopening the country. And this started on May 1st. He is probably gambling on a second wave peaking after the November elections. But he wants to restart the economy to try to secure a second term. It's possible that in an effort to get votes, that he could try to escalate tensions with China, Russia, Iran, and other countries. But this new anti-racist movement that is now emerging has really cut across these hopes. Trump may lose his populist credibility, and in addition to losing voters, Trump's bungling of the government response to the coronavirus, the economic crash, and this movement has, at least in the eyes of the capitalists, lost him some support on their part. The remaining capitalists will most likely go to support Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a much safer bet for the ruling class. Overall, though, the state as a whole, not just Trump, is definitely in a weakened and confused position. Many workers are not currently interested in the elections. We have more pressing issues like the economic collapse and these new protests. The two candidates running, Trump and Joe Biden, are agents of the ruling class. Joe Biden is mediocre at best and is not inspiring working and young people like Sanders was. Sanders has betrayed his supporters, though, repeating his mistake of 2016 to run within the Democratic Party and then to support the choice candidate of the Democratic establishment. He has called on his supporters to vote for Joe Biden. Biden represents a safer choice for the establishment. He has a clear history of supporting and working for capitalists, and also has a history of racism and sexism. During the civil rights era, when schools were being desegregated, he opposed busing, where Black children were brought to white schools to integrate them. He also helped the Clintons draft the 1994 crime bill, which in part helped lead to our current state of mass incarceration and gave more power to the police. The way forward is the creation of a new independent left third party that will fight against capitalism. We need to end gatekeeping of the anti-racist movement by the Democratic Party and elements of the Black Lives Matter movement that are friendly with the ruling class. We must remove the grip of the often out of touch and ruling class Black intellectuals and establishment politicians on controlling the movement. What we need is a broad democratic movement based on a class basis with a clear fighting program that can undo the damage that has been done and fight for economic development for the communities that are left behind. We have to link this movement with the labor movement and place anti-racist struggles on the union movement to support the capability of the protests, the effectiveness of the protests by, including unions, doing strike actions, etc. Fred Hampton, a key organizer in opposition to police brutality and a leader of the Black Panther Party, said it best. He said, "We don't think you fight fire with fire best. We think you fight fire with water best. We're going to fight racism, not with racism, but we're going to fight with solidarity. We say we're not going to fight capitalism with Black capitalism, but we're going to fight it with socialism." If we want to fight the core of racism and how deeply it is etched into our economic structure and within how society is organized, we need to remove the material conditions that allow and encourage racism to persist. And this means fighting for socialism and encouraging the systematic defendants of the natural tendency of the working class towards solidarity, regardless of identity, while fighting for real material changes to the lives of Black people, queer people, women, and the whole working class. To exert this pressure, we need strike actions, starting in Minneapolis, to hit the capitalist class where it hurts the most, in their profits. There's a huge opportunity to build a workers' party made up of elements of Black Lives Matter and the labor movement. At least 60% of voting age Americans support a third major party. Independents are the largest category of registered voters, and there has been the past few elections have seen lower and lower voter turnout as working class voters are less interested in the politics of the ruling class. Events will continue to prove how rotten the two corporate parties are, and there are already some initiatives being taken, like movements for a People's Party, to begin the process of creating a third left party. We have to link this movement with the broader movement against capitalism, because capitalism creates poverty, which creates crime. Profit dictates the distribution of the necessity of life, and we only have access to this based on our wages and compensation. The criminal justice system is at the service of profit. There's no interest in restorative justice or rehabilitation. We have to provide necessities for all, which will hugely cut down on crime, and we need to be able to retool our justice system to rehabilitate and retrain people. To conclude, the US is in an incredibly volatile situation. What will determine where this goes is the development of organizations with a clear socialist program, and whether we can successfully link these struggles to the broader struggle for socialism. Thanks so much.